Hey guys, welcome. Thank you guys for taking the time to come out tonight. This is my first webinar. I'm excited, and it's something that I've been planning for a while. I really wanted to kick it off here tonight talking about weather analysis. So tonight the topic is a deep dive into weather analysis for VFR and IFR pilots. Really just compiling a nice presentation to show you guys exactly all the sources that you can utilize in order to have full awareness of the weather. And really my hope is, so by the end of this presentation, you guys have a better scope or a better picture of where you can achieve accurate weather analysis data. All right, so continuing the slide, let's give this a go. And next slide, all right. You guys can see that? Thumbs up? All right, sweet. My name is Michael Colley. It's a pleasure being here. I've been a CFII here at Princeton since August of 2022. I've been enjoying it ever since, been loving it. I did my first intro flight at Princeton in 2013. So this is way back, about 10 years now. And it's the first record on my logbook still. It's #1 at Princeton. I'm still trying to figure out who signed it. So I'm not sure. I can't remember exactly who I flew with, but it was exciting and I loved it. And it began my aviation journey. And from there, I built up my flight hours and got through, and I ultimately got my private and so on and so forth. On the side, I do a lot of audio engineering, right? So there I have a couple pictures of some churches that I rig up lighting for. So I get up on a large ladder. I do a lot of that on the side, nonprofit work with moving lights. I work with stadium-sized arenas and things of that nature. And there is at the Cipriani in New York, where I helped host an event with Trevor Noah and a couple other people. So on the side, like I do a lot of multimedia things, and that's what I do outside of flying. But nonetheless, right, flying is the #1 passion. It's something that I've always wanted to do ever since I was 5. So yeah, and that's what got me here today. All right, sweet. So enough about me. We'll get right into the material. I hope that gives you a little bit of a scope about who I am. But nonetheless, first, we want to go over effectively what is a weather briefing, right? I think that's really at the crux of this conversation. And making sure that we have a proper weather briefing gives us a good way to analyze everything about the weather. A weather briefing is a brief statement about the cause of weather, for example, fronts, pressure systems that's pertinent to your proposed route of flight. So again, in simpler terms, it's just making sure you're aware, right? And it's very, very important to be aware of the weather. And we're going to see exactly why. So we have some listed statistics here. Let's click on this. Some listed statistics. According to the FAA, 30% of aviation accidents are associated with weather-related incidents. Now, 30% may not seem, in the grand scheme of things, a large number, but that's 30% too much, right? We want to make sure, as a pilot, if you've done proper training and if you've done efficient training, we've trained you up to be well aware of how to look up the weather. Now, as for some reasons or another, some pilots who become complacent will find themselves inside these situations that will pretty much cause incidences. Over here, you can see 75% of VFR into IMC accidents involve fatalities, right? So a lot of times a VFR pilot is feeling macho and wants to get to that destination, or feels like they're on a time crunch and they really have to go somewhere. They're willing to cut corners in order to try and get to their destination, ultimately involving fatality. IMC, poor visibility, convective activity, all of the above and more can lead to pretty hazardous situations. Right. So that is why it is important to have a proper weather briefing, right? And the importance of a weather briefing. Again, weather is dynamic and it can change very rapidly. Clear skies can change into a quarter mile, statute mile of visibility, 100, overcast and fog as little as 5 minutes. So that's been seen before. It's potentially very hazardous conditions along the route of flight. So you'll be flying along point A and point B. A lot of people, they'll be hyper focusing on the weather at the departure, and then they'll be hyper focusing on the weather at the destination, not really taking into account what's changing along the route of flight and how that weather is supposed to be changing. And then last but not least, a weather briefing helps a good pilot make an informed go, no-go decision. So now the pilot knows what to expect and can be alert to those changing conditions. FAA rules regarding weather briefing. So a lot of people, they're under the conception like, all right, Mike, you're telling me I should do a proper weather briefing. You're telling me I should do all of these things, but is it really required? What is the FAA stance on it? And here's the FAA stance. The FAR 91.103. Each pilot in command shall, before beginning a flight, become familiar with all available information concerning that flight. And that's the key, all available information. And that's the point of tonight, right? I want to make sure that I'm able to provide to you guys or show you all available information that is pertinent to your flight so that we can make more acute decisions, more informed decisions. For a flight under IFR or a flight not in the vicinity of the airport, weather reports and forecasts, fuel requirements, alternatives available to plan right, and etc. Right? I'm sure a lot of us know NW craft, and this statement is effectively saying that, but they really highlight weather reports and forecasts as first, because again, throughout our entire route of flight, we want to make sure that we are informed. All right, so now you guys know the importance. Now you guys know why we need to make sure that we have all of this down. The next, we're going to go through everything that we're going to cover tonight, right? So we're going to do weather briefing and sources, weather reports, and charts. We'll go over each of the charts that we are expected to see. Then we're going to do a mock cross-country brief in ForeFlight. I'll show you some of the features in ForeFlight. I don't expect everybody to be using ForeFlight. It's a payware app, but I will show you guys ways that you can get the same charts for free online, right, with some of the government sources. And then we have in-flight weather advisories, go, no-go decisions, and then alternate requirements that we'll go over for instrument pilots, and then some rules of thumb for VFR pilots who are trying to create alternates on their own. All right, so first things first, weather briefing and sources. So we're going to go over some of the sources that you can obtain some weather. Let's see, so where can we get a nice weather briefing? In first place, we all know 1-800-WX-BRIEF. This is a service that's provided for free. The FAA does sponsor this program. It's provided by the Lockheed Martin Flight Service, I believe they state. And with this service, we'd be reaching out, calling a bunch of weather experts at Lockheed, sitting in a room ready for us as pilots to help assist us in making educated decisions. I think this is one of the best methods to kind of make sure that we are prepared. If you type this on your phone, 1-800-WX-BRIEF, it'll ask you where your location is. As long as you have a password and email made or account on their website, they'll run through some questions that you can expect along your flight. The next, you're going to get in contact with a real person, and that person is going to be able to kind of guide you through a list of questions, which we're going to go over shortly. And they'll be able to effectively give you a full picture or a standard briefing of that entire route of flight. Next, we have ForeFlight. Back when I was learning, ForeFlight wasn't really a thing, and it was kind of like prohibited to use on check rides, but now we are able to use that. We pretty much use it for everything aviation related, right? It's most common aviation EFB, which we're going to see in the next slide. ForeFlight is now a government approved app that you can use to get a legal weather briefing. So in ForeFlight, there are a lot of tools and utilities that we can use to get a full weather briefing. It'll list it out for us. It'll give us a good full scope. And because it was purchased by Boeing, which we'll see in the next slide, by Boeing in 2019, technically speaking, it's now government owned, and we can use that, and it logs and records all the data. A flight service station. So if we can get the reception on the ground, we can reach out to the flight service station as published on 122.2. And it'll connect to the same resources that 1-800-WX brief will give you. And from there, in flight or on the ground, you can reach out and get a quick abbreviated briefing if you need. And last but not least, the FAA does say that we can self-brief ourselves in the AIM 712 Charlie or the AC. I really like the AC 91.92. It kind of puts it down into bite-sized chunks. We can get a self-briefing for our own. And effectively, a self-briefing, we use all means and sources of reporting, including automation, to provide a thorough evaluation of weather and aeronautical information in advance of flight. So effectively, going through every bit of information and making sure that we are well educating ourselves, we can legally self-brief ourselves. All right. And in that AC, I'd definitely say check this out at the end of the webinar. It has a lot of great information about where you can obtain these information. All right. So next, we go over briefly, I think I touched on it before, but, ForeFlight, most used aviation EFB, purchased by Boeing in 2019. It's official source for weather briefing, like we stated before, and then it's also a source where we can, as IFR pilots, file flight plans. And we'll go over a mock. I have my iPad here in the back, and we'll connect that to the screen so that we can view that as well. Next. All right, so let's go over the types of weather briefings. All right, we have a standard briefing, right? So a standard briefing will include conditions such as significant meteorological information, right, like SIGMETs that may influence your planning, altering or canceling your proposed route of flight. It will have a scope from top to bottom, going through a lot of information. You'll get this when you go over to 1-800-WX brief. They'll give you the totality of information that's available to them to help you make that briefing. An abbreviated briefing is effectively the same thing as standard, but only with updated information. So let's say you already got your standard brief at home before you got to the airport. But now when you get to the airport, you can call up 1-800-WX brief, and if you ask and request for an abbreviated briefing as of a time, they will give you all the updated information as of. So that's what I like to do sometimes, right? Before I go to the airport, I'll get a standard briefing, and then I'll get an abbreviated briefing once I get to the airport to see what has changed up until that point. An Outlook briefing, I don't think a lot of people take advantage of this, but an Outlook briefing is considered when the proposed departure time is 6 hours or more from the time of briefing. So when it's maybe a day or two out from the proposed flight, you can still call 1-800-WX brief, and they'll give you a nice outlook or a general consensus of what the conditions are supposed to be on that day of your flight. And I think a lot more people should utilize that because it gives you a little bit more information leading up to let you know if it is possible. The benefit with any official FAA source or brief, it's on record. I remember even with ForeFlight, I remember I used to email myself all my ForeFlight weather briefings because I was the mindset of, God forbid, let's say anything were to happen. If the NTSB were to ask me, Michael, did you get a weather briefing? I could just pull up the email receipt. But someone informed me a couple of, actually the VP of ForeFlight, I did my double I training with him, oddly enough. He told me that ForeFlight stores the recorded data of when a user gets a briefing. So that's all recorded. So God forbid, if anybody has to ask a question of whether or not you got a briefing, it is on record. Even when you call 1-800-WX brief, it is a recorded line. So that's the cool part. They're able to backtrack and make sure that you did get a briefing. So it's good on your record to show that, you covered all your bases. Calling a briefer may find areas that you missed. Now, this is why I'd highly suggest also calling a briefer or making sure that you do, because it's very easy when you're going down a ForeFlight brief to kind of skim over information. And there's a lot of cognitive bias that comes into play where we maybe highlight or select items that we want to look at and kind of tune out items that we don't. So calling a weather briefer will kind of put it into a human voice, right? They'll be able to kind of talk to us in plain English, let us know, and suggest not taking a flight versus taking a flight. And that's what we'll go into shortly. Talking to someone retrieving a brief will also give a second opinion, plainly stated. All right. Now, when you do call the briefer, there's a couple of things that we want to give them, right? And in this next slide, we have a list, right? So again, like I stated before, when you call 1-800-WX-BRIEF, free service, they'll give you a full weather briefing. There's some information that we want to have prepared. Those people are very important. They're busy, dealing with calls, and we want to help them make their job easier, right? And if we have all the proposed information about our flight, it just makes it that much easier to communicate and work with them. And they're there to help us. So we want to make their job easier. Way that we can do that is letting them know our qualifications. So it's very important to let them know whether or not we are private, just a private pilot, or if we have our instrument rating. The type of flight planned, whether or not it's visual flight rules or instrument flight rules. And this is important because even if you're an instrument pilot, it's good to let them know, if you're an instrument rated pilot and you're doing a VFR flight, and let's say along that route of flight, there could be a development of instrument flight rules. They may not be so inclined to discourage you from taking that flight. Whereas if the opposite were true, they could have the accurate information to kind of help you make a decision. Your aircraft N number or your pilot's or your name, right? So they want to know the N number. That's valuable information, so they can keep that for statistical information, and then your aircraft type. And that goes into a big play in the capabilities of the aircraft. So let's say I'm flying a Cessna 172 versus a Pilatus. That may have different capabilities in terms of the way that it deals with weather. Right, so that's huge. Departure point, the estimated time of departure, your proposed flight altitudes. Let's say we're changing course quite frequently along our flight. We may need different altitudes that we may need to consider, and our proposed route of flight, if other than direct, different landing spots along the way. Last but not least, the destination and the estimated time en route. All right, so we'll have all that information laid out, and as soon as we call them, we'll get on the line with the briefer. We'll just give them all that information. And they'll give you a variety of charts. They'll give you a variety of information from their charts, from their diagrams. And in order to stay ahead of the game, it's important to know where are they getting this information. And that leads us to the next slide. It's just, where does a briefer get this information? That flows into main meat and potatoes of the content tonight. And let me just make sure I'm good on time. Good. All right. So weather reports and charts, right? So what are some of the weather reports and charts that we want to take a look at as a flight? What are the flight briefers looking at, rather? First off, right, we can get a scope of the weather information that we're having along our route of flight by looking at some civilian weather apps. Civilian weather apps, they may seem quaint, but they're a great way to kind of go off and take a look at the scope of what's happening on that day. And before we call the briefer, or a couple days leading out to the flight, actually, one moment here. Bear with me 1 second. We'll go to the next slide here. So this is, forgive me guys, this is the scope of of all the charts that we're going to be going through tonight. But the first one, again, it's civilian weather apps. This slide here. The FAA does suggest that days leading out to the flight, we check civilian weather apps. We use the internet, the Weather Channel, any variety of apps to get a scope of what that the weather conditions on that day of the flight will be. And it's good, right? I know a lot of pilots, they, when you're at the FBO, they'll take a look at their default weather app on their iPhone, and they'll say, oh, this is what the weather is expected to be. This is what the weather is expected to be. That's what we should be doing. Just to have it in the back of our mind, just to have a large picture of what it might be. Then as we get to the next item here, we'll go into the METAR, right? or the observation at the airport. So this is one of the first things that the flight briefer will kind of talk to you about. What is a METAR, METAR? It's an aviation routine weather report. It's an observation of the current surface weather at an airport, and it's usually updated hourly, right? Sometimes they'll issue, you'll see on the METAR, there's like a little, it'll prefix it with SPECI, meaning there's special weather reports, any drastically changing activity. They'll publish those as necessary. But this is a great way for us as pilots to see what's going on at an airport at the current time, right? And it's just based off of observations. You can see I have an example here. It'll always list the airport code BTR and then the date and time, right? So it's the 16th of the month, 17:53 Zulu. It's usually released 53 minutes past the hour. So that's what you should be expecting to see. And then after that, you have the wind direction and speed factor, right? So we have the first three characters will normally be the wind direction 140 at 21, which is the sustained speeds. And then there's a gust factor of 26 in this example. After that, you'll normally have the visibility, right? 3/4 of a statute mile. And then we have a variety of different weather codes, right? There is a list of weather codes. I'll list the resources out there, but you have a variety of different types. Like, for example, this one is calling for rain. It's currently raining at the airport. And BR, meaning there is visible mist in the atmosphere. You'll see you have information about different cloud layers. So we'll have a broken layer at 800 feet, whereas, and then above that, we have an overcast layer at 1,200 feet. And those give us a kind of picture about whether or not it's wise, or as a VFR pilot, we can find holes in the sky to fly through as long as we meet the cloud clearance requirements. But this kind of gives us a scope about whether or not it is wise to do that, especially if it's around the vicinity of the airport. After that, we have temperature and dew point, right, in Celsius. And you guys already know once those numbers are very close together, or when they're the same, there is complete saturation in the atmosphere. And that can lead to mist or frost in the wintertime, or if the temperature is below freezing, it can lead to a lot of frost on the ground. After that, you'll have information about the altimeter setting, right, 2970. And then after that, you have the remark section. And normally the remark section will usually have more granular information. AO2, which we're going to go over the different altimeter types if we get to that tonight. And then normally they'll have the more granular information about the temperature and dew point in their decimal formats. All this can be get for free at aviationweather.gov/METAR. Next, we'll go over the TAF, right? So we can get a TAF, the Terminal Aerodrome Forecast. And this is, again, the word implies forecast. So look out into the future. This is one of the next pieces of information they'll give you about the 5 statute mile radius around an airport. It's normally valid for a 24-hour period. And this information, it comes out updated 4 times a day. All right. So 00 Zulu, 0600 Zulu, 12, and so on and so forth. So just splitting 24 hours by 4. And again, you'll normally see that updated 53 minutes past the hour. Same descriptors, abbreviations as the METAR, and it's super easy to digest. And we'll go over this, a couple examples there. The main difference is you'll see they have some change groups. So from, becoming, temporary change that are less than an hour, and those things that we can look at. And we're going to look at that when we do the mock cross country here in ForeFlight. Continuing through, we're going to take a look at some of the graphical forecasts, right? So the FAA has provided to us graphical forecasts for aviation, right? Complete, it'll have, effectively, you can drag and move on the map, and it'll give you scopes of pressure areas, fronts. You'll have wind activity, precipitation depictions on that chart, and we'll take a look at that after we do the mock. Just running through briefly here so we can get through everything. At at Princeton Airport, you guys already know that we can't get the ATIS or from the ground, but some information that ties into getting some of the ATIS from our favorite airports, like ASOS, right? Automated Surface Observation System, right? And it does what it implies. It gets the weather conditions on the surface of the airport. It is continuous minute by minute airport area weather observations to generate METAR information, like we discussed before. You have different levels of service, right? For example, Alpha, usually available at major airports, Bravo, human observers. So some human observers will work together with the data that's provided from a machine, and they're usually available 24 hours a day. And again, this is just at the surface, so this is why a human will be able to provide this information. Charlie, at airports with part-time towers, human augmentation ends when the tower closes. So when it means augmentation, effectively, there's still a device on the surface that is detecting the weather, but then there is a human that is able to verify and validate the information of that ASOS receiver. And then Delta, at smaller non-towered airports, you'll see a ASOS that it will be classified as Delta, not giving as much information, but it is still available to us. Next, the AWOS is an automated weather observation system. Normally, you'll see these at airports where you get to click a couple times and then it will read back the information. And you have different levels and types, right? So if you go back to the METAR in the example, you'll see it had AO2. And a lot of people, they'll see AO2 and they'll not know what it means. But from the METAR, you're able to see what that system provides. So when you see just the A, it'll only report the altimeter setting, right? I mean, usually it'll never list exactly what type it is. It'll just have the altimeter setting and no real remarks about what type it is. But if you see AO1, it will report the wind speed and direction, gust, temperature, and dew points. So just those. If you see AO2, which is normal for most airports, it will add a little bit of visibility information. And then if you see AO3 in the remarks section of the METAR, it will add cloud and ceiling data. And then again, effectively the equivalent to an ASOS, right? So that is on the checklist when you're at Princeton Airport and you see ATIS, AWOS, or ASOS, right? That is what we're looking for, especially when you're looking at the METAR, you can gain that information about what type of device provided that. Continuing through, we have the ATIS, and this is, even at Princeton, we are required to get the Trenton ATIS when we're coming back into the airport. And this gives us, again, minute information about what's happening at the airport. In this case, when we're coming into Princeton, it is what's happening at Trenton. But because Princeton is so close to that field, it's easy to interpolate off of that. An ATIS is a continuous broadcast of recorded non-control information in busier terminal areas. So again, when we tune into it, it will be a voice of someone who's recorded information, maybe about an hour within that of the current weather conditions. It'll have the weather, active runways, approaches, and any relevant NOTAMs to any aircraft that are approaching. It's updated whenever there's a significant change and it will always have that letter designation. So any of the phonetic alphabet, they give you that designation. So when you call into the tower, they'll immediately be able to identify whether or not you've gotten the correct and provided information. Continuing through, next we're going to get into some of the charts. So we had some of the field observations and we had some forecasts of TAF. But now when we start to take a look at the charts, it gives us a better scope or analysis of the weather conditions. I really like the surface analysis chart. It's as it implies, for the surface. But the surface analysis chart is effectively is updated every 3 hours, covering the 48 states. It shows high and low pressure. You'll see some frontal depictions. Right, we have some cold fronts, we have some warm fronts, we have stationary fronts depicted here. We have troughs, areas of low, and then we have occluded fronts that are indicated there. I think the cool thing about these charts as well, you can see the ISO bars. So along these little gray lines, you can see areas of equal pressure. And the cool thing about these is when the lines are very close together, you know that the pressure is changing very dramatically along that route. So a lot of times when you have, like if you take a look here near the Great Lakes, you'll see the pressure changes very dramatically over a short distance. You know there's going to be a lot of winds that are associated with that. So that's kind of like things that I look at, whether or not those isobars are spread out or across. On this chart, we also have high pressure and low pressure areas. I think these are great because they also show how the air is moving around those systems, right? When the way that I like to think about it is like a bottle, right? So here's a bottle of water here. And it's kind of like when you screw or open up a bottle cap. When you take the bottle cap and you screw down and clockwise, you're creating high pressure in that bottle. And that's effectively how high pressure air moves in a system. And then the vice versa can be true, right? When you're uncapping a bottle of water, you're releasing pressure, which is low pressure, and it's screwing counterclockwise and in the up direction. That's effectively how I look at the low pressure and high pressure areas on one of these charts. One thing that we can get about this chart is the best way to plan a flight, right? So knowing that information about how the air moves, we can use that advantage to make longer distance cross countries in more effective time. So for example, if I'm flying from New York to California, I'm going to want to stay on the bottom of the high pressure systems so that I can get that propel in the clockwise direction. But that's just a little bit about that. We'll take a look at that. Make sure we're good on time. Good. So the radar summary chart, this chart effectively is published 35 minutes past the hour, gives you a scope of rain or any precipitous activity. It's a top-down view, and it also on the depiction, it gives different color for the intensity or the severity of precipitation, right? And that's a great quick glance that we can look at to see if there's any precipitation around our area of flight. And I think this is great to look at because it's a close to near live snapshot of what's going on at the present moment to know if or which direction is the best to go into. Moving along, so we'll just keep it going here. Significant weather and prognostic charts, right? So they're a little bit more of a detailed version of the service chart covering conditions over the 2.5 days. They're issued twice daily. They depict pressures, systems, fronts, precipitations, squall lines, effectively the same, but for different altitudes as well. Then we have a low level chart, which we can take a look at. Flight level 240 and below. And that one I really like because it kind of gives you a scope of where the ceilings, more of like a synopsis of the ceilings and the visibility. And you can see the different, sorry, I'm just taking a look here. You can see the different colors down below. It has a legend underneath, and then it also depicts the freezing levels along that route of flight. And we'll take a look at that. Continuing through, right, we have winds and temperatures aloft charts. I really like these charts too because they help us know the best altitude to be at whenever we're making our route of flight. So these are great to take a look at. Let's say you're going on a long cross country and you're trying to pick between an altitude of 3,000 versus 6,000, so on and so forth. This will give us that scope along our route, and you can see there's an example down below of a chart depicting it at different altitudes. They're published twice daily, right? So we have a opportunity to see that, and they really give us, and they also give us temperatures above 24,000 feet. On here, they will give us the direction, true, of the winds and also the speed in knots. And the first two numbers you'll see here are the direction, wind direction, and then the next two are speed. Then after that, if let's say the knots are 100 to 199, you'll subtract 50 from the wind direction and then add 100 to the wind speed. So that's a bit of there's a bit of math that you have to do once the numbers are a little bit larger. And we'll go through that once we start doing the planning. Continuing through, we have the freezing level chart. Not much to say about this one. This is how it's really depicted. And it's great to get a kind of scope or a large picture of the freezing levels. You'll see it has a legend on the bottom. And each of these colors depict a different altitude that we can take a look at. Another is the convective outlook chart. Whenever I hear the word convective, I automatically assume thunderstorm activity, right? And this is great, again, to get a larger synopsis of thunderstorm activity that's going on in the continental United States. They give us 4 charts covering 8 days. Areas forecast to have thunderstorm 5 times daily, and then we have different severities. On the bottom there, you can see the legend there giving us the different color codes of the different severities through severe to numerous, scattered, widespread, expected. I like to take a look at this chart if I'm going long distances where I do know that there are systems surrounding. And then they have more chart. Is there anybody? I hear some noise. Does anybody have a question? I think somebody came in. And there are additional charts, day 4 and 8 charts that give us an additional scope for the days leading on. All right, so now we're finally getting to the last bit of information that a weather briefer could be looking at is weather advisories. So the name implies advisory in nature. Right, these are great to look at. We already know that our 3 different types of AIRMETs, Sierra, if we have any IFR activity, so we want to be listening out for this as well. We have AIRMET Tango for any turbulence along our route of flight, and AIRMET Zulu. So AIRMETs are, these are advisories that us as general aviation pilots may want to be keen to, and want to be looking out for, listening to. These types of advisories are ones that will make me consider or reconsider taking a flight depending on the severity or depending on if it's in my range, especially icing, right? I don't mess around with icing at all. So if I see an AIRMET Zulu, I may, knock off that flight if I'm going to be flying in any moisture. If there's any IFR or mountain obscuration, right, I want to take that into account depending on the ratings that I have. And then turbulence, right? So if I'm carrying any family, friends, right, I may want to consider that the turbulence AIRMET is in effect, and that may prove to be a challenge for comfort of my passengers. SIGMETs. Now, these are advisories that I would not fly in as a general aviation pilot. This is something that a lot of the bigger aircrafts, a lot of your 737s, a lot of your turboprops, a lot of your King Airs, these are advisories that they're going to be looking at, and they are more significant in nature. You definitely don't want to be flying one of these, and it is effectively providing the same information, right? So it gives you icing, gives you turbulence, any volcanic ash, any dust storms, sandstorms, if you're in that part of the country. You definitely want to be looking out for those because, again, those are more significant weather events. And then we have convective SIGMETs for any pop-up convective activity with thunderstorms, lines of thunderstorms, whenever surface winds are greater than 50 knots, whenever hail is precipitating from the sky, or tornadoes. And then inside the presentation, I also have the link there that you can take a look at where to get those advisories on aviationweather.gov. All right, so we now know some of the charts that we're going to be looking at tonight. Now is let's take a look at the time, 7:43. So we have a couple more minutes before I can open up the floor for any questions. But I think it'd be great to go over a little bit of a mock brief in ForeFlight of how you can get this information. All right, so I'm going to grab my iPad. and I'm going to pop this down and click on share with Michael's MacBook Pro. All right. Somebody is going to have to tell me if you can see this, because fortunately, when I share my iPad with the screen, I can't see anybody anymore.
Yes.
So forgive me if I'm not looking directly at the screen, but I hope you guys can see it.
We're good. We can see you.
All right, cool. Don't mind me. I'm currently at my house, and there's my church. But today, I wanted to do a mock flight plan to Kilo Foxtrot Alpha. All right, first flight, right? Where the Wright brothers did the first flight, I believe, all the way down there, the Wright Monument. And ForeFlight, again, it's an incredible app. Even this long distance flight, right? If I'm an instrument pilot and I want to get any suggested routes that I should go along my route of flight, or see any historical routes, what I do it exactly how I just did it. Flight plan, click on flight plan there, 39 November to Kilo Foxtrot Alpha. Then over here in the routes tab for us instrument pilots, we can click on there. And then ForeFlight will give us a list of suggested routes or routes that other pilots have flown. And I can see the type of aircraft. This one that took the SBJ route, it was a piston aircraft flying at 5,000 to 6,000 feet. So maybe this is a route that I may want to take a look at, because that's kind of very similar. Then a turboprop piston went at 16,000 flight level 200. And then if you look down there, it doesn't give any information about what type of aircraft took this route of flight, but this is another suggested airway flight that we could take. This one, you can see it has a little bit of zigzag lines there. But I'll go ahead and take this route here. Right, so I'll go ahead and select any route that that I feel is best suited, and that will take us along the route of flight, just doing our due diligence to make sure any bodies of water, making sure we're seeing the route. We go through the Bravo airspace there, and so on and so forth. What I'll do from here, I'll click on that little share button right below the clear in the flight planning section. You'll see right below the clear button, you'll see a share tab. And then you can click send to flight. So send it to what ForeFlight calls the flights tab. And from here, you can see all the flights that you've planned in the past or are getting ready to submit to the center. On this page, you can put your estimated time of departure. So let's say that we wanted to depart tomorrow at 2 p.m. Right? From there, we can have the departure and the destination airport. And ForeFlight also goes through the legwork of assisting us to retrieve any alternate airports along our route. Right? Anything that follows the 1, 2, 3 rule, it will be listed here, and the suggested conditions at that airport when we arrive. We can pick the aircraft profile that we want to fly with, and we can select the flight rules that we're going to working with. You'll see the route of flights, the different cruise altitudes, and if you're going to an airport that has any FBOs, you can select that there to plan even your taxi as you go along. But before, we're not going to file that. Main thing there, I want to take a look at that briefing button up there. So that is provided to us. If we go ahead and select that, it will give us, again, a government approved briefing that is going to be logged and recorded. So we'll give it some time to load here. And there it is, right? So on the side tab here, it will show us exactly all the information that it has provided, or all the information that it's gathered that's needed for a flight. And on the bottom here, you'll see a next button. All we do is just kind of flow through by clicking next. We click next, we can just tab through each of the items there. First, we have the surface analysis chart. We already reviewed this here, but taking a look at the surface analysis chart for the times provided, we can see if we zoom into the area that we're going to be flying, we have a cold front that's going to be coming through right off from the west. We also have a low pressure system a little bit further up in the north. And going along, I can see the isobars are quite spaced out. So I do know that the wind may be favorable in that condition. Off the coast, we do have a large pressure differential or a small pressure differential. So indicating that there could be some activity out there that's normally going to be passing away from us from the Coriolis effect. Continuing back over to the briefing, we have the METAR. So again, as we discussed, an observation at an airport. And the cool thing about ForeFlight, it gives us along our route of flight, and it's color coded too. So you can see along our route of flight there, every airport is indicating green, so VFR activity. But this gives us a scope of what we can expect. Let's say we need to make an emergency landing at any of the airports, or what the present condition is. Looking along, again, scrolling down, you'll see the raw data, right? And I'll give you, if you look at each column, I like to go per column basis. So I like to take a look at the wind speeds at the current airport. So you'll see it at Trenton, the first one there at 13, on the 13th of the month at 23:53 Zulu. The winds are at 250 at 5 knots. Going along there, you can see that it goes 240 at 7 knots at Bravo Lima Mike. At November Echo Lima, it goes 240 at 6 knots, 270 at 4 knots at Old Bridge. And then I like to go just along one piece of information at one time. So winds, and then what I'll do, I'll start from the top. I'll go to visibility, so 10 statute miles, clear, clear, clear. Next, I'll go for temperature, 10 Celsius, 11, and I know what the trend of how the weather's moving along at the surface along my route of flight. Next, we have PIREPs. So PIREPs are very valuable pieces of information. This is pilot reports along our route of flight. And again, if you call the weather briefer, they'll give you any pilot reports that have been reported in. The cool thing about PIREPs is it's what's going on at the present moment. And I think this is the best source of information, because we can gather a lot about the information from our charts and our data. But actually getting firsthand accounts of what's happening in the skies or what's going on is crucial. So here we can take a look at the first aircraft. It'll say it's from Trenton. And then if you look at the raw data, you're at the highlighted information, you'll see the location, the time, the altitude of the aircraft, flight level 370, the aircraft type, B72. Not exactly sure what type that is. Listed in the chat if you do know. Turbulence, you can see there's moderate drop. But for a general aviation pilot, I'm not looking at this one, right? Because I already know at the altitude, I'm not going to be flying at flight level 370, or my aircraft is not capable. So what I would do, I would scroll down and I would take a look at any aircraft or that's flying at an altitude that I'm flying at, and we want to take a look at the type. So, for example, if this one is more north of my route of flight, let's see if there's anything along the route of flight. Doesn't seem like there's anything along the route of flight, but we'll take this one, for example, this aircraft that's descending into Hotel Papa November. Pilot report, the time, and that the aircraft was descending into approach. You'll see the altitude. I know it was descending into approach because you'll see DURD, during descent. The aircraft type is an SF-50. I believe this is, don't quote me, I believe that's the new Cirrus jet. And then they were effectively saying that they lost 10 knots on short final. So you can see how this information is extremely valuable. So from this PIREP, you can see this aircraft, a jet, lost about 10 knots on final. So what does that say about our Cessna? And that's pretty much going through PIREPs. It's important to know the location, the time, the altitude, the type of aircraft, and different remarks about what they experienced. Next, as we discussed through the TAF, right? It is a forecast. So looking into the future. Again, I like to go down a specific column of information. So at Trenton, I can see the trend of wind speeds are supposed to pick up and then die down. So that's through the night they're supposed to pick up, but die down once it gets to morning. As we scroll down, we're taking a look at closer to our destination. Again, just a 5 statute mile radius. We're taking a look at each of the wind speeds along the route of flight. We can see it consistently stays no more than 10 knots along our route of flight. After that, right, we can scroll back up, and then I like to look at the visibility. So I like to hyper focus on visibilities along the route of flight. Different times, you can see the from time for each of the TAFs, and it'll let you know what's expected at that time. Then after that, I like to go down the column of cloud conditions. So we can see a few clouds at 25,000 feet near Philadelphia, and scattered goes down through few, scattered, and so on and so forth. As we continue, wind charts. So this is a great top-down view of the winds, right? So at flight level 6,000, where we fall to, you can see a kind of cross-section along our route of flight, and we have the little wind barbs. So on a few charts, you'll see the wind barbs depicting the wind speeds, the wind directions, and oftentimes temperatures at that altitude. You'll take a look here. It looks like a little fork, but every full stick is about 10 knots, or is 10 knots rather. And every half stick width, I wish I could screenshot. Go ahead, screenshot that. Take it there so that I can zoom in. Every half shot width there is 5 knots. And then you can use that to add up to figure out what the wind speeds is along your route of flight. So I do know that this one is depicting 15 knots. And you can see that over the course of our flight, we should have a slight crosswind at 6,000 feet. That gives us that information. Excellent. You can see that entire route. Next, we're going to go over to the vertical cross-section chart. So this one, I really like this one. It is a ForeFlight chart. It is really interesting how you read it. The way that it was demonstrated to me was if the aircraft is on its side on the line, it's showing effectively just a cross section of how it's moving along that flight. So if you took a plane and you put it flat on your screen, you'd see how it's affecting you still on the cross section, but that's how the line is depicting it. I know it's quite a little bit confusing, but the nature of it is giving you the altitude, what's happening at altitude. So you can see the different altitudes along your route of flight as you climb up and as you stay on cruise. You can see the wind barbs again, how they affect the airframe of the aircraft. And this chart also depicts icing severity. I think this is really cool, right? So let's say it's a lot colder season. We'd see the different ice. It'll depict the different ice at different altitudes. So we can know whether or not the altitude that we've chosen is a good pick. Now, take it with a grain of salt, because if you do know that there's icing around a specific area, you may not want to fly near that altitude. You may want to take some precautionary measures to stay well above or below that system of ice. All right. So next, let's take a look at the time here. Ooh, we're running short on time. But in all, right, we viewed the winds aloft, right? Winds aloft table shows us the different wind speeds sustained at the different altitudes. Main important thing on the winds aloft chart is taking a look at the different temperatures along the route of flight. So what I like to do, I like to look at each altitude leading up to my cruise altitude to see if there's any temperature inversions and to see if the temperature is reducing as expected on the normal lapse rate. And then we can also see the different wind speeds as we start climbing through. Next, it'll go through different NOTAMs along our route of flights, destination NOTAMs and route NOTAMs, and so on and so forth. Make sure to read your NOTAMs, right? So I know a lot of people like to skim over them. I'm only skimming over because of time, but it's very important to check the NOTAMs along your route of flight, making sure that you're aware of any changes, closures, or anything that you need to be aware of. But that, in a nutshell, is a ForeFlight weather briefing. And I hope from this teaching, you've learned at least something, or let me stop sharing the screen so I can see all of your nice faces. I hope from this entire session that you've learned, or you've seen at least something that you haven't seen before, right? Something that you haven't seen before, a chart that you weren't aware of. Because again, if we go up to the top, the FAA wants us to be aware of all available information concerning our route of flight. Going through, let me just take a look at the next pieces of information. In-flight weather advisories. Guys, if you don't know, we have tons of different sources. If you're in flight and you're not aware, or you want to be updated on the weather along your route of flight, you can contact the FSS. You can see the frequency as published, or normally it's on 122.2, and that will direct you to the flight briefers that will give you any abbreviated briefing that you need. Then we have ForeFlight or other apps, and they normally work with any XM features that you have on your aircraft, or you can get an ADS-B receiver. I actually used to build these and sell them. I used to sell them to the Air Force. I used to make them with Raspberry Pis, and you could build your own ADS-B receiver, and it's fairly affordable, right, if you build it on your own, or you can buy the big box options like the ForeFlight Sentry. They're completely back ordered because they're trying to, I guess, what I was told, Oshkosh kind of depleted their stock, but Oshkosh is long gone. Anyway, you can use these devices to help you get satellite weather and FISB or FISB information along your route of flight. It'll take from the ADS-B towers and send it directly to your tablet EFB, giving you additional information. Continuing through, skimming through, again, because time is of the essence. I apologize. Next time, once I get this all laid out, I'll be able to kind of make it more concise. But go, no-go decisions. When you have all the pieces of information, when you've done your appropriate flight brief, consider your aircraft, consider your equipment, consider the capability of your equipment, whether or not it can get you out of weather. Consider all the weather briefing charts and support. And the weather briefer, right? Definitely listen to what they say. See if they recommend the flight, or see if they're trying to dissuade you from the flight. Take that into account. Run through your I'm safe checklist. I'm not going to go over that, but you guys already know that. You want to make sure that you are well fit to fly. Set personal limits and do not bend them. That's the key, right? That's really what gets people into bind, is when they have these personal limitations and they're like, but it's only 1,000 feet lower than what I'm comfortable with. You know what I mean? So even when I first got my instrument rating, Greg, he thought my limits were perfect. He suggested, I go out to Atlantic City when the ceilings were at 1,800. And he suggested that try that first and then work your way in, right? Set your own limits for instrument flying and VFR flying. That's huge important. Continue a process of decision-making. Flight planning, pre-flight, en route. Always, always, always be second-guessing yourself, asking yourself the questions. Is today good? Is this a good flight? Is this a good decision? If you are well-rested and assured that this flight is going to be is safe, and you've run through the checklist, you can take that flight. Way too many times do I see pilots in the FBO pacing and wondering, should I go? I'm looking at this, but I see this weather condition happening, and I see that this rainstorm is developing from the north. Whenever I'm pacing back and forth trying to decide whether to go somewhere, I just call it off, right? Why, pace back and forth trying to decide? Just call it off, right? You'd rather wish that you were flying and then be in the air wishing that you're on the ground. So it's a continual process. Do not be afraid to discontinue a flight or divert. I always tell VFR pilots the greatest tool in your tool bag is the 100-degree turn. 180-degree turn, right? You can always turn back. You can always go away from the weather that you see in front of you. Don't be afraid to. If you see if there's a chance of it getting worse, see that in front of you, just turn back. Continuing through alternates, just listing the 1, 2, 3 rules. If you're an instrument rated pilot, you should already know the 1, 2, 3 rules. And understanding those for the different approach types. So 6 and 2, 8 and 2 for your different approaches, and then making sure that we're able to go from the MEA under VFR conditions. Apologies, just skimming through for time, but we're going to make sure that we have these slides available to you if you want to take a look at some of the information that's provided. For any pilot, it's important to have an alternate regardless of the flight operation. I know when I was just a private pilot, along my route of flight, I made sure that I looked at alternates along any part of the flight. So if there was any issue that I need to divert, whether it was halfway through, whether it was a quarter way through, I was able to divert. And that's kind of the same mindset that you should have even now, making sure that you have a good out for whatever happens along your route of flight. And then when in doubt, don't go, right? Again, best tool in the bag, the 180-degree turn. Guys, after this, I've listed some information that I think is really helpful. The FAA list has this great pamphlet on how to obtain a good weather briefing. And it has a lot of the information that I spoke about today, but it gives a couple of rule of thumb that you guys can glance at. The AC, if you guys have never taken a look at an advisory circular, definitely take a look at 91, 92. Great information that you can skim over. It kind of gives you great additional resources that you can get a good self-weather briefing. So definitely check that out. And the NOA imagery legend is cool, right? So just like a sectional, at the side pane of a sectional, you'll have the legend available to you. The NOA imagery legend does that for a lot of the weather charts. So you're able to glance over that information, go through the weather charts, and if there's anything that you don't understand, a symbol that you don't understand, you can also take a look at it from there. And with that, I have to ask if there's any questions. I'll take a look at the chat here. I see someone said I look good. I think that's great. I think I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Sandro. I really appreciate the support. If you guys have any questions, feel free to leave it in the chat there. I'd be happy to answer. I know.
Thank you, Michael.
Oh, it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, great job. Great job.
Thank you very much. Hope I provided some great context and additional information to you guys.
This is John McDonald. The one thing that would be really helpful is to have a nice compendium of all these great websites.
Yes.
That you mentioned. I don't know whether you could email that to us or just leave a copy at the.
No, of course. Yes. So at the end of the presentation, we'll put your name down and we'll send you an email of the slides, and then also the provided links.
Yeah.
Most definitely.
Thanks very much. That was really interesting.
It was a pleasure.
Very good.
Thanks, Mike.
No, of course, guys. I really appreciate you guys taking the time on this night. I know it's a little late, but I really appreciate you guys taking the time to listen. With that, I'll hand it over to Gabby.
Thank you, Michael. Congratulations on your first webinar. And I think we even have our alumni, Wesley, here, tuned in there for the end. Or for most of it.
I know, it was looking pretty good, man. Nice job.
Just great. I had a great inspiration, it
was all you. You did great.
Thank you.
If anyone suggestions for topics or specific areas for the next webinar, let us know. You can email us, call us, stop in at the FBO, and we can tailor it even more if there's instrument questions specifically, or there are things that people are experiencing in their private. The more you tell us, the more beneficial it'll be for all of you. Right. It's okay. You don't have to answer now. You can think about it. with that, thank you for joining us tonight. We hope to see you guys flying this week. And this recording will be on the website. It's going to be on our YouTube channel. And then the slides will also be available underneath the videos. Same thing for the previous slides with Wesley. All the links to his Google slides are there. And if there's any resources that you're missing, let us know and we'll get them to you as soon as possible.
It's great.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you all.
All right. Good night,
Thank you
everyone.
very much.
Take care.
Right.
I really
Welcome.
Thank
appreciate
you,
that.
Michael.
Really good,
and,
Mike.
Pleasure.
Thanks. Thanks,
Nicely
Mike.
done.
Good night. Thank
night.
you, Michael.
Good night.
All right, good night. Awesome
Take care.
presentation.